a little bit of how I felt on the side of the road. So yeah, so that kind of led to me just like diving in and getting as many books as I can and getting as many magazines and just learning everything I can learn about personal finance and, and looking into the Bible to see what it had to say about money, because I was surprised, but it actually had a lot to say about money. And that just kind of led me to one principle that just changed everything for me. And it's something that you've probably heard, just like I had for years. And I call this the Seesaw Principle, but there's another way you've heard it. But the thing is, this is what's really important, is you've probably heard it before, but until you actually get it and get the depth of it, it probably won't have a life-changing effect on you, because that's how it was for me. I'd heard this over and over again multiple times growing up, but I just never got it, and knowing something is just very, very different than having an understanding of it. And Einstein says it like this. He says, any fool can know, but the point is to understand. And that's what I'm hoping that we can get across tonight, help you guys understand this at a deeper level and the depth that might be available to you. And so this principle is to spend less money than you earn. And so, yes, you've probably already heard this. It's like, wow, that's obvious. Okay. But just like E equals MC squared, let's like look at that little thing. That was Einstein's, one of his claim to fame that like revolutionized so much. And there's just so much more depth to it than, what we see just in that little formula. So that's what I want to dive into tonight and just kind of unpack this a little bit and how you can use this to really change your financial life. And we're going to talk about two different ways and how this is going to work. So I call this a seesaw principle because we all understand how a seesaw works. Like we've probably played with them as kids, and maybe you've had an experience like this. Hopefully not too many, but we all remember playing with one, and we understand like there's a basic factor that's in play with a seesaw. And a seesaw can't function without gravity, but gravity is the thing that just makes it work. And there's just no getting around it. It's like we can, on one side of the seesaw, like we can use our legs to push up, but at the end of the day, whatever one is heavier is always going to come back down. And there's just no getting around it. It just is. It's gravity. And so like right here, so we have this girl on the one side, and then we have the apple on the other. And she can jump up, push this thing up, and the apple will come down. But we all know that apple is never going to hold her up in the air. You know what I mean? So this is like major deep revelation. So be taking notes on this. But anyway, it's like we understand this intuitively. But for some reason, I think a lot of us tend to forget that the spending less than we earn principle, I don't know. I find so many people are actually fighting against this principle. And the principle actually works exactly the same way. It's this universal, completely unbiased principle that it just is true. You know what I mean? And so many people are fighting against it. And that's kind of what, I want to help us kind of break out of today. Because that's what I did for years. I just assumed that someday I would get my money in order and I'd be in great financial success. But I didn't want to pay any attention to that. And I didn't want to even care about spending less than I earn. I just wanted to assume, well, I don't need to worry about that. It's going to work out. I'm going to make more money and everything's just going to work out. But the fact is, no matter how much money you make, it doesn't matter if you're making $30,000 a year, $50,000 a year, 100, if you're making $1 million a year, or if you win the lottery, you're going to lose it all if your seesaw is leaning the wrong way. So if you're spending more money than you're earning, it doesn't matter. It's just that simple. And this is why we see lottery winners going bankrupt just after a few years, because they'll get a big influx, that might tilt the seesaw a little bit, but they're spending so much more than they had coming in. And then it just disappears. And this is also why we see people who might be on a $30,000 salary and they'll save consistently and spend less than they earn for their entire 40-year career. And then they'll have $1 million nest egg from a $30,000 salary. Like that's how this happens, is because people are obeying this principle. And so the bottom line is, if you're spending more than you earn, you are going backwards financially and you are headed down a dangerous path. And this is a path that leads to like maxed out credit cards, like where I almost was, all kinds of money stress that most of us are probably acquainted with, like bill collectors, bankruptcy, and like all this terrible stuff that just isn't fun. This is the path that we're headed down when the seesaw is leaning the wrong way. And, and this was another thing that I always thought, well, I'm just a few steps down this road, so I can like kind of turn around But the truth is, it's like that's the direction that you're headed, and the momentum is taking you that way. And every step you kind of get out of sync, you're just getting further and further down. And so if the financial pressures that you and I have now are bad, as we're like kind of going that wrong direction, it's just going to get worse, like for every step that we move down that path. And so the goal and the key is to tilt the seesaw the other way, and just flip it so that we're earning more than we're spending. And the wonderful and amazing thing about this is that it doesn't matter how much money you and I make, as long as we have our seesaw leaned this way, we have a bright financial future ahead of us. And we are moving forward. Our net worth is going to be growing. We're going to be able to pay off our debt. We're going to be able to have retirement savings, take vacations, buy a house, give more than we ever thought possible. It's like that is the result of having the seesaw leaning the right direction versus having it leaning the wrong direction. It takes us down that other dark path. And a lot of times you don't see this immediately. It's not something you might notice from 1 month, but if you look at it from a more of a macro view, and you look at a 1 year or 5 year or a 10-year phase with having that seesaw lean in the wrong direction or right direction, that's where you see just huge differences in where you end up. And so this is another mistake I used to make as well, where I used to think, well, I'm going to spend exactly what I earn. And because that'll be good enough. And in theory, it could be, but it's basically impossible. So looking at this picture, you probably know from your seesaw experience that it's really difficult to get it perfectly balanced. And most times we're going to spend a little bit more money than we anticipated. So the key is to not try to do it exact, but to really tilt it in the direction that we want it to go. So the first key and secret to all this is to flip the gap. And so most people, when they're starting out, they're spending more money than they're earning. And so the goal is to see that gap that we have kind of laid out over here. So we have a gap over here. And so we want to flip that, so that we're earning more than we're spending over here. And let me just share a little story with you about this. So there was this old retired Air Force pilot who shared this interesting fact about flying, and it just illustrates this point really well. And he said, for every single degree you fly off course, you'll miss your target landing spot by 92 feet for every mile you fly. So that amounts to 1 mile off target for every 60 miles flown. And so to put this in a bigger illustration, if you start at the equator and fly around the Earth one time, 1 degree, just one tiny degree off, you would land 500 miles off target. That's just like insane to think about, so the longer you travel off course, even if it's a tiny bit, even if you're spending $10, $15 more than you earn each month, you're like headed way off target. Now obviously if you're 5 or 10 degrees off, it's like you're going to go so far off target, but even just being a little bit off target can make a really big difference. And so like I was saying, most of us when we're starting out, we're spending more than we earn, and when we're doing that, this gap is working against us. And so just like the pilot, for every dollar that we spend over what we're earning, we're getting further and further away from our financial goals. And for every dollar, it's moving faster away from our financial goals. Our first goal should be to shrink this gap until it's eliminated. And then ultimately just kind of flip that so that the seesaw flips in the other direction. And then as soon as we do that, we are now on our way to making forward progress. And so we're on our way to paying off debt, to saving for things, or really any other financial success. And as long as we keep the seesaw tilted in the right direction, we just can't lose. We're just going to keep making forward financial progress. So the second key here, and the second secret and thing to really maximize this, is to, after we flip the gap in the right direction, we want to widen the gap as much as possible. So, and there's a couple different ways to do this, but the biggest thing is that by widening this gap, we're going to be able to speed up our progress so much faster. So flipping the gap kind of points us in the right direction so that we're making forward financial progress, but widening the gap is where we can really see some major progress and see it a lot faster. And there's 2 key ways that we can do this: by reducing our expenses and by earning more money. And this is fairly intuitive and fairly obvious, but when you see it as these are really the only 2 knobs that I can turn, the only two leverage points that I have. It just really, I don't know, for me, it just kind of brings some clarity with the whole thing. So what all this means is that, well, there's a snowball effect to this, like an amplification factor. And this is why you often hear people say that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And essentially what it is it's this thing working against you or working for you. And so if you have money, or it doesn't even matter if you have money, if your seesaw's lean the right way, it's just going to amplify what you're doing, and everything's just going to build on it just like a snowball and move faster and faster and faster. And at the same time, if you're leaning the wrong direction with it, that's why the poor are getting poorer, because it's the same principle over and over and over again, where you're just going backwards like the pilot. You're going further and further off course. And, unfortunately, it doesn't matter whether it's fair or not. It just is true. It's just a principle, just like gravity, that we can choose to work with or we can choose to fight against. And I prefer to work with it and reap the benefits as much as we can. So here's just a quick illustration of where we were, or when my wife and I got married. Well, I should say where she was, and she's given me permission to talk about this. When we first got married, I had like a year or two head start on her, trying to get our finances in order, or my finances at that point in order. And when I married her, she was living at home, really had very few expenses, but was masterful at using a credit card, just brilliant at her use of a credit card. And so anyway, so essentially she was earning $1,600 a month with her job, and she was spending about $2,200 a month. So, I mean, she was really far leaned in the wrong direction. And so as a result, when we got married, she had a good amount of credit card debt, maybe 5 figures. I don't remember exactly how much she had, but a good amount of credit card debt. And, in every single month she was doing that, she was going about $600 backwards in debt. And over a course of a year, that's over $7,000 in debt. And, if you take just 1 year, that's $7,000 in debt. And if you have a salary of $1,600 a month, that is going to be really, really hard to pay off. It's going to take a long time. And you're going to have to tilt that seesaw really far in the other direction to start being able to make progress on that. And that's what we did. She, for better or worse, married me. And as soon as we got married, I was just determined that we were going to pay off our debt. And so that's what we did. We did every single thing we could do to widen the gap on our seesaw, to just make that spread wider and wider and wider, so that we were earning considerably more than we were spending. Even though we didn't have big incomes, we just reduced our expenses to next to nothing so that we could start paying off our debt and really move a lot faster through the progress. And once my wife Linda and I, once we successfully shrunk the gap and we were finally spending less than we earned, like I said, we were just really focusing on widening it to pay off our debt. We focused on decreasing spending and increasing earnings. And the goal there was just to be able to pay this down a lot faster. And then a couple of the unexpected benefits of doing this, and some of you are probably familiar with these, some of you might have experienced some of these already, but as we kind of started this process, that snowball thing really made things exciting, because every single thing we did, it amplified and it was just moving faster. And so there's a momentum, and it's a forward momentum that's like really, really fun to be part of. And so anyway, bottom line, our whole financial situation began to improve a lot quicker than both of us expected. And we had run the numbers and figured, it's going to take us 7 years to pay off all of our debt or whatever. And everything just moved a lot faster than we both expected. And so that was a really cool, unexpected benefit. Another thing was that money stuff, paying bills, paying debts, whatever, organizing money, like all this stuff actually became fun. That was like super unexpected, because that was never fun for me, and it was never fun for her, because we just hated it because we were going backwards. And so we would bury our heads and pretend like it wasn't happening or whatever else. But once we were making forward progress, it suddenly became fun to do the budget, because we saw, wow, we're paying off our debt. And each month we get to see how much we're paying off. And just seeing that progress is incredibly motivating. And then another awesome unexpected benefit was that we were fighting less. I think we all know that marriage fights are very often about money. As it began getting a little bit more organized, we became more and more on the same page, and we were just fighting less. And that was like awesome. So that benefit of having that extra marriage piece was just really, really nice. So with that, I want to kind of give you some homework, some steps to kind of start applying this now and start taking some practical steps towards moving forward with this. So first one, I want you to regardless of where you are, even if your debt's paid off, I still want you to do this. I want you to look at your last 3 months' bank statements and see where you stand. I want you to determine which way your seesaw is tilted. It is possible that you have your debt paid off and you are leaning the wrong way. Or it's possible that you think you are leaning the wrong way, but you're leaning the right way. And it's awesome. You might not be making as much progress as you'd like, but you might be moving forward. There'll be a lot of you who think that your seesaw is leaning the right way, but it's actually leaning the wrong way. So what I want you to do is determine for sure. I want you to look at the last 3 months' bank statements, see how much you spent each month, and let's average that over 3 months, and then see what you earn for those 3 months. And then let's look at it and see how those earnings, the amount you spend and the amount you earn, compare. So that's what I want you to do for the first step. Next one, and this is really important, I want you to measure the gap. I want you to figure out, regardless of which side it is, regardless of which way your seesaw is leaning, I want you to see what it is. Are you spending an average of $100 more each month than what you earn? Are you spending $100 less than what you earn each month? I want you to know that exact number of how much you're spending each month more than you earn. And so what we're going to do with this is our first goal. We get this number, and this is the first goal where we can really focus on having something measurable that you can change, that you know is going to set you on a strong financial path. And so that's why we're doing this, and that's why this number is so important. So if your number is $50 a month, then all you need to do is find a way to come up with $51 a month to flip it. And so what that means is we either have to find a way to make an extra $51 a month, or we have to find a way to reduce expenses by $51 a month. And once we do that, if your number is 50, then we have flipped it. And so that's what we're trying to do here. So it's really important to measure this just so we have that kind of marker in the sand that we can go from. And so then next, after that, I want you to ask yourself, whatever that number is, if it's $200, if it's $10, whatever, I want you to be asking yourself and thinking, what can you do to flip this gap this month? Without waiting 3 months or 6 months, it's like, if you had to do it this month, if you had to find a way to, start coming up with an extra $50 or $200 or however many dollars a month, what would you do to do that? And it's really important that you ask this question because I've read about this in multiple books about how our subconscious mind is just always working in the background. And when we ask ourselves questions that we don't have answers to, our subconscious mind is like working, trying to find the answer and to reveal it to us. So that's one of those things that it's just really important that you constantly be thinking about this and just asking yourself, and you will find an answer, especially if we're talking about $50. It's like, there's got to be a way to do this. There's got to be a way to reduce your grocery bill by $50 a month. Or there's got to be a way to work some extra overtime or pick up this side job over here or something to do that. And I really appreciate you stopping by and joining us on this. Have a wonderful rest of the day, rest of the week, whatever it is for you. And we will talk to you later.